I've been involved with the Historical Society since the early 1990s, on the board, off the board, volunteer. And Nicole asked if I'd be willing to do the introduction to the introduction, and I said, I would be glad to. So we just have a few thank yous before we begin. And I'm pulling up my notes. I got my marching orders complete with text. So first, we would like to thank the First Parish Federated Church for allowing us to use their newly renovated space. So please, applause for the First Federated Church. And I'm going to have to applaud again because we need to applaud Alex, our technician in the back. Thank you so much, Alex. One more round of applause for Sally Hunter for her wonderful figures for organizing the unfortunately. And then finally, last but not in our strengths the least, for the last 25 years, thank you to Kenny Buck Savings Bank for sponsoring these lectures. We really appreciate their ongoing generosity. So a big round of applause for that. And I just want to ask, how many people out here are members? Raise your hand. How many people renewed their membership for this year? Raise your hand. That is fantastic. We are a little low on our membership renewals, and so if you haven't done that, we encourage you to do so. And this is going to be my soft card sell for those people who are not members. We do this lecture series for free. We are so glad that you're here. Even if you're not a member, we want you to come back. This is something that's part of our mission. But if you believe in like this lecture series and you think that it's wonderful, or if you believe in the Historical Society's education programs that touch every single kid that goes through Central School, or if you believe in us collecting and preserving the photographs and artifacts that are at the County House that are really integral to not only South Berk's history, but Rollinsford's history and this larger region's history, one way you can show that is becoming a member. It's not that much, you can do it on the website, it's really painless. But just even at the lowest number, at the lowest level of membership, which, like I said, is like less than going out to McDonald's, you can, I know, you'll get much more out of it, much more healthy things out of it. But that membership is a vote of confidence. And when we go to places like Kenny Buck Savings Bank and other grantors for the different programs and restoration work that we need to do, having those members supporting us, even at that basic level, really tells them that we have support in our community, that our community likes us, and that what we're doing matters. So, once again, this is not to guilt you into membership. I want you to come back, even if you're not a member, but if that's something that you think you can do, I would invite you to please go do so. And you can ask any one of us who are on the board or volunteer for the society, and we can help you with getting that information so you can support us. So, that's it. Painless, hopefully. I'm now going to pass it on to Brad, the curator of our lecture series, to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Just one personal note, I'm a little sensitive about this. I'm kind of hobbling around. There's that LA rumors that I've been doing heavily. The only part that I would contest is the heavily. But I just literally today got out of the boot off the crutches from an Achilles rupture back to place. So, but anyway, thanks for coming tonight. Our speaker tonight is Dave Saums. I don't know, I mean, always I will get, someone will at some point say, you should have a program on railroads. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess we should. And then I thought, well, for this year, I'm going to go look for someone. And if you do that, and you start looking around online and contacting historical societies, very quickly you realize all roads, actually all tracks, run to Dave Saums. Dave is a lifelong rail enthusiast since growing up outside of the Bronx on the New York Central Railroad Harlem Division. And then his family picked up and moved upstate to the wilderness along the Harlem Division New York Central Railroad line, so that seemed to cement this for him. He is a member of the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society, the New York Central Railroad Historical Society, the Mass Bay Railroad enthusiast, and he thinks another 10 or so related historical societies and organizations. He was the editor for the Rutland Railroad Historical Society's quarterly magazine. And unrelated, but equally fascinating, he is a longtime member of the Center for Railroad Photography and Art in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't know how you get there, but you can ask him about that. I had originally contacted about doing a different program for us tonight, which I'm still really interested in, but we'll hold that for another time. And he was like, well, I'm glad to come up and do that for you. But this is the problem. It's the snow train. And I kind of held out for a while, and I was like, okay. Yeah, come and see the snow train. So please welcome.
Brad, thank you for the introduction. I brought my small screen with me. That's a joke. This thing's a monstrosity. It barely fits in my car, and I have a station wagon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, my name's Dave Saums. I'm originally born in Bronxville, New York, but I grew up in at least what I consider my hometown, Hillsdale, New York, a big town that has maybe 800 people in the center of the village and no police force. I actually did become a rail fan at 13, and I went to college and graduate school with the intention of working in marketing for a major freight railroad. And I actually did get 2 offers from 2 Class 1 railroads, what was Norfolk and Western, today Norfolk Southern, and what was Conrail in Philadelphia. I turned them both down. The salaries were this big, and I had college loans starting in 9 months. I couldn't figure anything that would allow me to eat on a budget, so I turned them down. I still think about that every day. And Norfolk and Western, which was at the time headquartered in Roanoke, Virginia, became Norfolk Southern, and the man I would have been working for helicoptered out of the sky with his wife into West Newbury, Massachusetts, 4 miles away from where I live. I don't know how that happened, 40-some years later. His title was Manager, Market Research and Economic Forecasting, exactly what I wanted to do, those 2 topics. Anyway, this is about snow trains. And
A little louder, please.
I've tried to make a bit of a joke here. I say over on the left, online dating 1931. Okay, I'll go on. The Boston, Maine was the developer of this concept. It is not a ski train, it is a snow train, and I'll explain why that is. Oh, I have a subtitle here. What we did for a date in Boston in 1931. It was the depths of the Great Depression, and the fact is, this is rather remarkable, that so much happened once the first train ran, and it was so significant, so wildly successful. The B&M had artists produce a poster. This is the very first one from 1931. This later became the cover of a brochure that the B&M published every year, which contained all the schedules. And those schedules grew and grew and grew in volume. It's astounding to see how many different routes were used to how many different destinations. Anyway, I like graphics, and these posters are tremendous. I actually own one myself from 1935, an original, and at the end you'll see a photograph, I think it's here, that shows that poster. If you wonder where those posters, framed, the posters stand about this high. I would have brought one, but they're really difficult to transport, and they cost an enormous amount of money to frame. They would have been hanging in North Station in Boston for the B&M, if you're wondering where these would have been used. There weren't very many of them printed, so finding one is like finding hen's teeth. Anyway, what was the concept of the snow train? The very first snow train in January 1931, ran from Boston's North Station to Warner, New Hampshire. If you've been to Warner, you might say, there's no railroad here. Well, there was. And what the B&M orchestrated, and they had a publicity manager who was absolutely tremendous. This was essentially his idea. Depths of the Depression. People worked a 6-day work week on average, or 5.5 days. crews that were commuter train and passenger train crews in Boston would kill for an additional half day of wages, or an additional day of wages, or 2 days of wages. And the B&M had plenty of commuter equipment that sat idle all day long on Sundays, and for half the day on Saturdays. They also had passenger train equipment that, not everything was used every single day on every passenger train. So what they did is they put these two components together. They put them to work. This first train to Warner, New Hampshire, which the town of Warner is very proud of, by the way, January 1931, the people that bought tickets to ride this snow train, and the Boston, Maine had to go to great lengths to explain what the dickens is a snow train. No, we're not hauling snow. When the train got to Warner, the Boston and Maine had arranged for 75 or 85 households to take in people riding the train for the night. Can you imagine living in a small town that you might have lived in all your life in 1931, and you're asked to take in a complete stranger? Worse yet, city people. We couldn't fathom doing this today. And the Boston and Maine distributed a menu for dinner. You had to feed these people, these city people, getting off the train. What was this all about? The menu was exactly the same for all the houses throughout town. Just prior to the COVID pandemic, the Warner, New Hampshire Historical Society had a program about the snow train. And do you know what we were served for dinner? The very same menu. I thought that was just great. I told you they were proud of this. What happened that weekend? Barn dances, bonfires, a movie in the movie theater in town, a ball, a snow queen. It wasn't a ski train. There wasn't any skiing. There was no downhill skiing. There was cross-country skiing, but nobody went out for alpine downhill skiing at the time. Nobody could afford to. Nobody had the equipment. Nobody had lessons. Nobody taught lessons. Nobody knew how. So you went ice skating, or you sat by the bonfire. There were songs, there was a dance, and so on and so on. You were encouraged to go to church on Sunday morning. And in this case, this is a 1933 program that, and I include this because I have this one, I don't have the Warner one, but this details just how many different events were organized by the railroad in this case, Littleton, New Hampshire, for a snow train arriving. It arrived at 7:20, Saturday night, December 30. Remember, most people worked at least a 5.5-day work week, so you couldn't leave on Friday in many cases for many people. There was a sled ride to begin. There was a movie in the theater. There was the snow train ball at the Opera House with dancing until midnight. The queen of the snow train was to be chosen. 49 cents per person to attend the ball. I find this absolutely fantastic to see how much detail. I'm not including the whole thing here, and I know you can't easily read much of this, but the point is skiing, tobogganing, snowshoeing, skating at Remich Park, 5 minutes walk from the hotels in Littleton. A skiing group to leave for Mount Kinsman Trails. Trails 3 miles, 2,800-foot drop. So there, you'd have people who are going to be doing downhill skiing. It was nowhere near what it is today. Just keep that in mind as we go through this. Guests are invited 10:30 a.m. on Sunday to divine worship at the various Littleton churches, and so on and so on and so on. A maple sugar party at the community house. Again, showing of a movie twice, apparently, that night, 7 o'clock and 8:45. A hockey game. I mean, incredible organization. And this is only looking at the organization for what the people on the train were doing. This has nothing to do with the logistics required by the railroad for how this was all organized. And that was incredibly detailed as well. This concept for the first train in Warner was so successful, it immediately blossomed into a larger and larger schedule of these excursions. The company photographer, Stanley Bauman, for the snow trains, took this photograph, and here you have 3 Pacifics, Boston, Maine Pacifics, steam locomotives, 462 Pacifics, on snow trains, loading, getting ready for departure from North Station. Way over in the far right-hand side, you can see the tower on what was the Hotel Manger. Manger? 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 Okay. I never knew. Uh-oh. I'll take your word for it. This is a very poor map of the B&M, but I included it because it covers the entire B&M, and it shows all of the different routes of the railroad at that time. I was talking earlier, and I said there were 3 Boston, Maine lines from Boston to Portland. There was the eastern route, there was the New Hampshire route, and then coming up from, I lost Worcester. It's so bad I can't even read it myself. But there was a 3rd Main line that came up in an arc from Worcester through Nashua to Portland. And much of Route 125 in New Hampshire is built on the right-of-way of what was the WNNP. The red dot is Warner, New Hampshire. So this is the route from North Station to Warner for that first snow train. Crawford Notch and North Conway became very popular destinations. Plymouth became very popular as a destination. There were snow trains that originated, I guess this is Worcester here. Okay. So there were snow trains that originated from Worcester, most of them from North Station, a small number of them from Lynn, Massachusetts, and on and on. A number of different origins, but also a number of different destinations. I said the first train ran to Warner, New Hampshire, and there's no railroad there today, but here's what the freight station and the passenger station looked like in Warner, New Hampshire. I believe both of those are gone now. Wood frame buildings, very typical at the time. And I'll say for the 3rd time, Warner, New Hampshire as a town was very proud of the fact that they were the very first destination for the first snow train. So they issued a commemorative coin in 1974. This was for the bicentennial of the town. And what's on the front of the coin? First snow train, January 11, 1931. I have one of those coins. Well, actually, it's my photograph, come to think of it. On the right, I don't know anyone who's had a good explanation for what this is, other than for the very first snow trains, the B&M had these cast, I assume bronze, pinbacks made, so everyone on the train who had bought a ticket would be issued one of these and would wear it so they could be identified at all the various events going on in town. Now, that sounds like a fairly expensive way to do that, and later it became a patch that was you would sew onto the whatever outer garment you were wearing. This is actually the cover of, believe it or not, a matchbook. The B&M was good at publicity. And here's what happened. In terms of development, not just of the snow trains, but also of skiing as an outdoor sport in North America. The Dartmouth Outing Club was established in 1909. The Intercollegiate Winter Sports Union in 1926. The Dartmouth Outing Club had downhill skiing. The first Dartmouth Outing Club downhill ski race was in 1928. Otto Schneebs, an import from Switzerland, was named the coach of the Dartmouth ski team. They also then had a ski team, 1930. The B&M ran their first snow train in 1931. Coincidentally, the Southern Pacific on the West Coast ran what they called snowball specials to Truckee. And those, I assume, originated out of San Francisco to Sacramento to Truckee. That was 31, 32. But those were out and back excursions. Those weren't snow trains in the sense of what the B&M had done. I would also like to point out that the third Winter Olympics were held in Lake Placid, New York in 1932, and that included downhill skiing and ski jumps, and that had a big impact on raising awareness. Again, it's the middle of the Great Depression. These are the worst years of the Great Depression. Not a lot of people had money. And certainly people didn't have money for lessons in downhill skiing if they could find a teacher. And they didn't have money for equipment. They couldn't go to Switzerland to buy equipment. So the Winter Olympics did a lot to raise the awareness of downhill skiing. The first national downhill ski race was held nationally, was held at Mount Moosilauke in New Hampshire in 1933. The Chicago Northwestern ran the first snow train in the upper Midwest to Eagle River, Wisconsin. The first U.S. rope tow was installed by the White Cupboard Inn in Woodstock, Vermont. I made the mistake once when I was giving this presentation. Someone thought I was saying that the first rope tow was installed in New Hampshire. And I had to really, really quickly say, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. There's apparently a war between New Hampshire and Vermont. Anyway, the New York Central Railroad ran their first snow train to Phoenicia, New York in the Catskill Mountains in 1935. The New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad ran their first snow train to Norwalk, Connecticut from Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan in 1935. By 1936, the Boston, Maine was running 36 different snow trains carrying 24,000 passengers all around New England. The New York Central in the same year carried more passengers on their snow trains than did the B&M. Oh, we can't have that. Anyway, sorry, I'm a lifelong New York Central fan. I have to explain myself. The Central Vermont Railroad also ran a small number of snow trains. Those went to Waterbury, Vermont. 1936 was their first year. I need to keep going because I'll talk too much. This is one of the brochures from the 1932 Winter Olympics. I happened to go to the 1980 Winter Olympics. I happened to buy, I can't believe this happened. I got 2 tickets for the USA-West Germany hockey game. And I went. It was a blind date. Had to take a bus from Albany, New York. It's the longest blind date I've ever had. It was absolutely horrible. It was terrible. We were completely mismatched. But boy, that was a great game, if anybody remembers. In other words, the U.S. won. Okay, more dates. I won't go through them all, but you can see what's happened here. There were many of these operations operated by different railroads across the country. New England, New York State, the upper Midwest, and even reaching out into the Pacific Northwest. Snow train operations ended for World War I. The B&M ran its first post-war snow train, as best as I can determine, either something like December 30 of 1945 or 31st. I am sure they must have wanted to do it for New Year's Eve weekend. The New Haven ran their first snow train in late January 1946. By 1947, the snow train numbers were back up. In that year, 20,000. The last snow train that the B&M operated was 1956. But the Railroad Enthusiasts Incorporated, people like me, rail fans, ran a first snow train in 1964, and that continued until February 1972. Today, the Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiasts, which is the follow-on organization, has run what they call Snow Express up to the Conway, North Conway area. I take that back, excuse me. Starting from North Conway, running up to Crawford Notch. The last time that operated was, I know I wrote it, I should remember. I would say that was 4 years ago. It was just post-pandemic, I believe. I think that's right. We tend to think of time in terms of before or after the pandemic, don't we? The B&M ran snow trains to all of these different destinations in New Hampshire. And in the 1930s, it was a very, very popular event. Now, Carl Byron from the Boston, Maine Railroad Historical Society had pointed out to me one day, well, if the fares seemed very, very inexpensive, keep in mind that in 1931, a dollar you need to multiply that by 20 to get to today's valuation. And so a $1.50 fare for a one-day excursion overnight, multiplied by that by 20, it was $30. In 1931, that was not small change. That was pretty significant. So maybe people rode once in the winter, twice maybe. Armstrong Company in Boston set up baggage cars, Boston Maine Railroad baggage cars, with essentially a ski shop inside, a snowshoe shop inside, so that you could rent clothing, you could rent skis, skates, snowshoes, cross-country skis. And many of these snow trains included a diner or some type of snack car operation. And often that would be open all day long. The best example I can give is the snow trains that were operated to North Conway. Amtrak Downeaster, love it. I can stand on my front porch in the wintertime, 9 miles away from the Boston, Maine main line, and I can hear the freight trains, the rumble, the diesel engines climbing the grade into East Kingston, and I can hear the air horns of the Downeasters and the freight trains. Love it. Got to buy a house closer, though. The diner and snack car operation. At North Conway, for example, the snow trains, there might be more than one, there might be 3 in North Conway at one time. They would all have their diners open all day long. If it was 10 degrees out and you've been ice skating all morning, you need a place to warm up, maybe have an adult beverage. All of these snow trains ran on very different, and in some cases, very elaborate schedules. Here's an example of, this is from one of the B&M brochures, and this is for operation out of Worcester, Massachusetts. This would be Worcester on the Boston, Maine, but the Boston and Albany, New York Central, would run connecting trains from Boston's South Station to Worcester and to Framingham to connect with the B&M snow trains operating to the north. In this case, this is 1940, January 1940, January 14, 1940, an operation to Plymouth, New Hampshire, left Worcester at 8:15 in the morning, arrived in Plymouth, I suspect you can't read that, at 11:45 in the morning. Dining service limited to 500 ticket sales, to give you an idea of how many people would ride a single one of these snow trains. For Crawford Notch, a departure from Worcester at 8:15 in the morning would arrive at Crawford Notch at 1:55 in the afternoon and leave at 5:13. So you had to hustle if you're going to get any activities in. Some more examples of, sorry, I know I keep stepping in your, okay, all right. Some more examples, this time to Intervale on the left, Littleton, New Hampshire on the right. I was asked one time, weren't there any snow trains operated to Maine? Maine's kind of flat, except where? Well, pretty close to North Conway. I cannot find any evidence that the B&M and the Maine Central, or the B&M with the Grand Trunk, ran, for example, a snow train to Bethel, Maine. I haven't found any evidence that there was such an operation. There was no Sunday River, of course, at the time. There were no big downhill ski areas like that at all. So if you wonder why so much of this talks about New Hampshire destinations, that's why. The New Haven Railroad ran operations, snow train operations out of Grand Central Terminal in New York to, of all places, very tiny towns along what was their Housatonic division of the New Haven, along the Housatonic River. Not very far from the New York City metropolitan area, not very big hills, but again, these were snow trains, they were not ski trains. And so there would be the same kinds of events, skating on a pond, a bonfire, barn dance, snowshoeing, and so on. Bruce Davison is another rail fan, lifelong railroad employee, and he very kindly donated these photographs from the George Lane family, and so I could include them. I only have a couple of them, but this is Goffstown, New Hampshire at the station, obviously, And on the right, there's a big sign on the side of a baggage car. And what it says, you can't read it, but that's the George Armstrong Company repair shop, skate, ski, snowshoe repair shop, where you could rent clothing, rent snowshoes, and so on and so on. That's an example of one of them. I don't have very many photographs that those operate.
That building's still there.
Is it the Goffstown Station? Oh, is it really? Oh, good. Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. This is an absolutely terrible photograph. But it's a little tiny black and white photograph about this wide, and I did the best I could in Photoshop to make something of it. But in essence, what you're seeing here is there are two Boston, Maine Pacifics, 462 Pacific steam locomotives, on the head end of a snow train. They're crossing Frankenstein Trestle on the Maine Central Mountain Division. They're on their way to Crawford Notch or through Crawford Notch, and they have 8 passenger cars, according to the handwritten photographer's notation on the back, January 1938. It's a tiny, tiny photograph, and I apologize for the horrible image, but it is what it is. Here's the same one, same train, 1940, January 1940, somewhere between Intervale and Bartlett, again, according to the photographer's notes on the back of the photograph. I want to state clearly, because this is a great thing to do, especially on a weekend day. The Conway Scenic Railroad today runs what they call the Notch trains up and over the former Maine Central Mountain Division to Crawford Notch and to Fabian, just on the other side of Crawford Notch. It depends on how much snow there is. It depends on which winter we're talking about. But these trains, if you happen to have an interest, they're worth going to ride when they do run. And Conway Scenic has been sold. It's owned now by a man, David Swerk, who is very active in promoting the railroad. He's now working to extend passenger operations east on the former Maine Central Mountain Division, which was abandoned in 1982. And he's been clearing brush, clearing trees that are 8 inches in diameter that have grown up between the rails. And his intention is to get to Portland somehow. There's a problem with a missing trestle that burned, but the goal is to be able to take cruise ship passengers up to North Conway and to Crawford Notch and back. That's pretty cool if it ever actually happens. Here's a photograph from the late Dwight Smith. This is from his collection. I don't know whether this was a company photograph or not, but this gives you an idea of what things looked like in the coaches on a snow train. This is dated 1946. Dwight Smith passed away at age 100 just recently. He was the founder of Conway Scenic Railroad. If you haven't been there, it's worth going to. Again, just as a day outing, it's very interesting. He worked for the Boston Maine Railroad all his life. He was a sales agent. He was a general manager for one of their subsidiary railroads. Really wonderful man. And he kept his memory to the end. Really, really great to see. These are some photographs that come from what is Trains magazine, which was originally published by Kalmbach Publishing Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is a photographer that I think must be standing on the canopy roof of the canopy that ran along the platforms in North Conway in order to get this photograph. Either that or he's up in the station building itself shooting out a window. But what you see here is there appear to be 3 different snow trains that have all arrived at North Conway. And look at the crowds of skiers. This is, I think, just prior to World War II, and by now, downhill skiing has become a thing. It's become a big thing. And originally at North Conway, the snow trains for people who wanted to go skiing would be met by farmers who brought their team and their wagons loaded with hay and hay bales. You rode the wagon to his hill where he had put up a rope tow. That was literally how things really got going. I've mentioned logistics for the railroad. These are examples of what were called bulletins published by the railroad. These are internal documents that went to railroad employees in the stations along the line. In this case, this is Sunday, March 17, 1935, for a snow train that's going to run from North Station in Boston to Canaan, New Hampshire on the northern and return. Consists of one baggage car, which is the Armstrong shop car, 3 coaches, 1 diner, and there's 7 additional coaches available if they sold enough tickets. Leaving Boston at 8:15 in the morning, arriving in Canaan at 11:15. There are lots of pages to these bulletins. I don't want to bore you with showing you page by page, but this is what was the official documentation for logistics, for how the operation was going to be managed, who was in charge, where were there extra coaches staged if needed, where was an extra locomotive staged if needed, and so on and so on. How the baggage car and the engine were going to be turned. In this case, there was a Y at Canaan at the time, so they could turn the locomotive so it was heading the proper direction, didn't have to run tender first back to Boston. Okay, some fun. These are company photographs. These are also from Dwight Smith's collection. I get a real kick out of these. And pardon my bad sense of humor. I better say that in advance. Here's a Pacific locomotive cab, 3708. Young man leaning out, obviously looking very eager. And what's he wearing? It's 1946, post-war. He's a returned veteran. What's he wearing for the winter outdoor temperatures? He's wearing his Army-issued uniform. Pretty good winter uniform. And the young girl, the blonde, who's with him, what are they doing in the cab? 1946, North Conway. Everybody's trooping off a snow train that's arrived, and oh my gosh, look, the same young woman, the same guy. How about that? These are posed photographs from the Boston, Maine. Well, at least they got a couple of good-looking young people to pose for them. Note the cars in the background. These are wooden coaches, which eventually would be outlawed in the United States. But these were from the commuter train pool, and some of them were now replaced by steel cars from regular passenger train service. Those are not new cars, by the way. Another photograph that also shows, you can see very clearly, if you were able to look closely, you could see the wainscoting here. This is all wood construction. By this time, 1946, these cars would have had a steel underframe added for safety purposes. Safety in the railroad industry is a really big deal. It is the #1 issue. And employee training on safety topics is a big deal. So is alcohol. There's what's known as Rule G. If you're found to have alcohol in a test, you're done, you're toast, you're fired. And the same thing with drugs. Anyway, this is another from the collection that Dwight Smith had of a snow train unloading in North Conway. You see lots of cars here on the right, but the same couple again. By golly. Okay. Is this a Ford Model B? Anybody? No? What is it? I cannot figure out what that vehicle is. I don't know enough about cars of the era, but is it a Model A? I have a neighbor who has a Model B, and his Model B doesn't look like this Model B. I know that. Okay, in addition to the private cars that you saw lined up, look at this. We have school buses that are put into service, and I am sure that the railroad organized this. They had to have, given the volume of people, and by 1946, the number of people that were here for downhill skiing, now it's becoming a ski train. And up on the roof of what's labeled as the ski-mobile, hand-painted here, ski-mobile, apparently everybody's skis were loaded onto this thing, and this thing then hauled them off to Cranmount or wherever they were going for downhill skiing. There's the passenger station in North Conway, which still stands today. That's what it looked like. That's how it was painted at the time, and the clock is still functional. It's 11:30 in the morning. And over here, this is the 3-stall wooden engine house. This still stands and is still being used by Conway Scenic today, as is the station. Dwight Smith had the sense in 1970 to recognize that buying this property had value. The B&M was abandoning the line. In all likelihood, the buildings would all have been torn down, the turntable taken out, everything would have been ripped out, and that did not happen, thankfully. Oh, the same couple again. It's the end of the day. I just love it. Okay. This may be a little less interesting to you now, but I said that the idea, the concept spread across the country. In the back there, you see a Boston-Albany broadside for snow trains operating out of Framingham. And they would run also from South Station in Boston on the B&A to Framingham and to Worcester, and then connect with B&M snow trains. The Great Northern Railway and the New Haven are other examples that you see here. Fairly quickly, this would give you an idea of the number of destinations. As this concept expanded, I've marked this area in blue because this is where the B&M snow trains all operated to, a wide number of different destinations. The New Haven Railroad brought their snow trains up the Housatonic Division to Pittsfield, Massachusetts. The New York Central operations ran to the Woodstock and Phoenicia and Pine Hill in the Catskills. I lived for 9 years in Woodstock and Kingston in the Hudson River Valley. When I first went to work, loved it. I spent 42 weekends out of 52 one year on the east shore of the Hudson River with my cameras, photographing trains. You can tell I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. The Delaware and Hudson got into the act. The D&H ran snow trains in combination with the New York Central from Grand Central to North Creek in the Adirondacks. This branch today is a tourist railroad, the Saratoga, Corinth, and Hudson, SC&H, run by a man named Hal Raven very successfully. The New York Central also ran snow trains in combination with the Delaware and Hudson all the way to Canadian Pacific Territory and then to Sainte-Marguerite and Saint-Agathe in Quebec for what later by then were downhill ski centers in those towns. The Rutland Railroad also even ran a few snow trains, and those were run in cooperation with the New York Central, also from Grand Central Terminal. And I said that the Central Vermont ran to, this is Montpelier, this is Stowe and Mount Mansfield, but those operations originated out of New London, Connecticut on the Central Vermont, and also in cooperation with the New Haven from Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. Here's that same broadside, snow trains on the B&A. So these are run in cooperation with the Boston, Maine, because the Boston Albany did not go to Wilton, New Hampshire, or to North Conway, or to Intervale. They were doing this in cooperation. The railroad industry is a very, very interconnected industry because it has to be. And these kinds of cooperative agreements were very common for passenger train operations for a century or more. You see some of the fares, $2.75 to Wilton, New Hampshire, $3.75 for the round trip to North Conway, with a dining car attached from North Station. The New York Central ran to all these different destinations. I put Hillsdale, New York on the Harlem Division in red because that's the town I grew up in. And here are some more destinations. And as you see, again, cooperative agreements with other railroads to make these possible. Mont Tremblant also. Some examples of publications, some of them from the railroad, some of them from local organizations. And interestingly enough, this was a New York Central and Delaware and Hudson advertisement, a broadside, for the first international snow train up into the Laurentians. Again, cooperation between New York Central and Canadian Pacific. This is a broadside for the same operations, again, published by the New York Central. A little more expensive by this time. This is not a real snow train poster. It's a mock snow train poster. The artist was a man named Ted Ray. I don't know when he did this. I'm guessing 1980s, 1990s. And this term, the winter sportsman, is one that I believe he made up as what would have been potentially the name of a snow train on the B&A. The New York Central also ran snow trains up into the Adirondacks. And I've already commented on the New York Central and the Rutland running to Rutland and Manchester and in the area. And in the Catskill Mountains, this is on the left, the Catskill Mountain operations. The New York Central also ran on the West Shore Railroad, which was a subsidiary, from Weehawken, New Jersey. So you had to take a ferry from Midtown Manhattan. You took a ferry over to Weehawken. You got on the train, you could ride up to Bear Mountain. And by this time, again, 1946, there was modest downhill skiing at Bear Mountain. I mentioned that I grew up on the Harlem Division. The Harlem Division was Commodore Vanderbilt's original railroad. It was chartered in 1831, and it still exists today, and owns the land under Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. But the Harlem Division ran directly north from New York City. Hillsdale was where I grew up, and it ran to a connection with the Boston Albany in Chatham, New York. Chatham at one time had 5 routes. They're not shown here, but there were 5 railroad routes in and out of town. It was so important as a railroad town that it is said that it was on Hitler's bombing list. The question is, how exactly was he going to bomb? How was he going to get across the big pond? Well, there wasn't just a V1, there wasn't just a V2, there were going to be other similar weapons. They just never made it off the drawing board. Okay, some New York Central photographs. This is an FX, Class FX steam locomotive on the New York Central. This is in the Catskill Mountains. This is the very, very early downhill skiing, rope tows only, area known as Simpson's Ski Area. There was a warming hut that you can see over to the left. It wasn't very much of a drop. It wasn't a very long run, but it was downhill skiing. And the rope tow was installed in 1936, so relatively speaking, very early. That became a destination. This was the Ulster and Delaware Railroad, which the Interstate Commerce Commission forced the New York Central to acquire in 1932. And so these locomotives are former Ulster and Delaware locomotives. Details, I'm sorry, but these are things I'm interested in. This is 2 snow trains operating to Simpson Ski Area. They're actually very nice images, photographically speaking. And here at Phoenicia, New York, the station's on the left. That station still stands. That is today Empire State Railway Museum. And you can see by the height of the hills here, as we're in the height of the hills here, we're in the heart of the Catskill Mountains, and 2 snow trains. There were trains run up into the Berkshires. They're actually the Taconic Mountains, but people in New England call them the Berkshires for some reason. But geographically, they're very, very old formations, and they are officially the Taconic Range. And on this New York Central brochure, you'll see here service to Hillsdale and to Pittsfield and to North Adams. I'm cheating a little bit. These weren't really snow trains. These were regular service passenger trains. But I have a photograph. This was the station in Hillsdale right outside our front door. I blame that station for creating me as a rail fan. And here you see skiers in spades getting off of one of the New York Central Harlem Division passenger trains. This is March of 1947. I have just a small number of these negatives, which I'm really pleased to have. They're not very good, but gives you an idea of what went on. You can see buses here. That's the Globe Hotel in the background. That no longer stands, but it was there when I was growing up. And there are 3 buses in this photograph, and there's some sort of big limo in there too. These folks are getting off the train and they're heading to the Catamount Ski Area, which still exists. It straddles the line between New York and Massachusetts. This is one of my own photographs. In the morning, the school bus stop was right outside our front door. Our house was on a sharp curve on a county highway just below the village. And if the morning train was running on time and if the school bus was late, I could grab my camera and run out of the front door of the house and up the hill onto the iron bridge over the rock cut in the railroad. I could photograph the morning passenger train stopping at the station. So that's what this is. I'd run down the hill, get on the bus, go to school. I was ninth grade, I guess, 8th grade. February 1972, and these trains stopped running by court order in March of 1972, so just a month later. This is Washington's birthday weekend. The Hillsdale Iron Foundry is on the right. That's long gone. Our neighbor's garage is visible in the far left there. This is the noontime passenger train coming up from Grand Central Terminal. It's come 109 miles. Everyone getting off the train that day had skis. Everybody was on their way to Catamount. Again, just a month before the end of this service. And people in the area today ask me over and over, why can't we have passenger service today? Well, nobody cared in the 1970s. The line was torn out and abandoned and torn out. Too late. New Haven snow train destinations, there were quite a number of those also, but most operated in connection with other railroads, as you see here. Some more publicity. The Central Vermont had 2 absolutely gorgeous posters like this. Reproductions were printed a number of years ago. There was a renovation project for the Waterbury, Vermont station, which had been built by the Central Vermont. It originally had a tower. My friend Les Skangas in Vermont is an architect, and Les was the architect who won the job of renovating the Waterbury station, which included rebuilding the tower on the station. These posters, the one on the right, is one of 2 that were sold as fundraisers for that renovation effort. They weren't cheap either. On the Rutland Railroad, a very small railroad that ran down the spine, the western spine of the state of Vermont, and all the way across the top of New York State to the St. Lawrence River. The Rutland actually ran a few snow trains to Arlington, Burlington, Dorset, Manchester, and Middlebury, which is the location of Middlebury College. And the Middlebury College Winter Carnival was very important also in the development of winter sports. This is the Manchester, Vermont station. I don't know an exact date. I'm assuming this is late 1930s. Snow train returning, about to pick up everyone on their way back to what eventually would be Grand Central Terminal in New York City, in Manhattan. And I'm puzzled because I also see some people who look like they're not in ski gear. They look like they might be actually regular riders or trying to be regular riders. Another photograph on the Rutland. These are both from the Manchester, Vermont Historical Society. New York Central equipment, most of it, some Rutland. This was an example of what was handed to the people that had bought tickets that were going to ride the snow train. This is 1938, January 21. Greetings and welcome to you skiers and skiesses. Skiesses on the Manchester snow train. You will arrive at Manchester Depot at 5 a.m. They left Grand Central Terminal the night before. However, please do not get off at that early hour. It will be too dark and you will feel too comfortable beneath your warm blankets. Anyway, your buses will not be at the depot until 6:45 a.m. The train will be parked at Manchester Depot until 8 a.m. if you find it necessary to linger in slumberland and complete your beauty sleep. But look at this. Skiers who are guests at houses number 6, 7, 9, 10, 11 may, if they wish, remain on the train until it reaches East Dorset and get off at that point. Oh, wait a minute. That tells me that the railroad had, again, gone to local residents and they had people riding the snow train assigned to stay over in local those city people. This time, city people from New York. City people staying over in my house, really? Airbnb, yeah, right. This is part of a very long broadside that I have detailing some of the schedules. And what's really interesting is to see for these excursions from Grand Central Terminal to Vermont, stops in Vermont, look at the fares. This is 1937-38 winter. A coach ticket to Manchester, out and back, so it's the round trip, $7.50. But this, I find just absolutely amazing, astounding. You could buy a ticket in an upper berth or a lower berth in a sleeping car. And if you don't know the terms uppers and lowers, these were open to the aisleway, and they just had very heavy draping you would pull once you got in bed. You pulled the draping, so you had a little bit of privacy. So that's an upper and a lower berth. Somebody's above you if you're in the lower berth. If they need to get up in the middle of the night, well, you could also, a compartment, and astoundingly enough, a drawing room. Now, these are obviously Pullman cars. If they have upper and lower berths, compartments, and drawing rooms, they're operating Pullman cars with drawing rooms. Remarkable, absolutely remarkable, and not very inexpensive either. The station in Manchester, Vermont, now looking a little worse for the time. Okay, modern B&M snow trains. The B&M snow trains, after the end of World War II, ran until 1956. I've mentioned this. They were steam locomotives that were pulling the trains until diesel power really made inroads. But I have yet to find any good photographs of Boston, Maine diesel locomotives on what I know to be snow trains. The challenge is I may have photographs of passenger trains on the B&M, and there's no way to know whether they were snow trains or regular service trains if it's not stated by the photographer. The last one operated in 1956. Am I okay on time, or am I getting late? All right. Oh boy. This is Model Railroader magazine from 1988. My friend George Drury, who's passed away now quite a number of years ago, lived in Milwaukee. And he was quite a modeler, but he was also very well known to rail fans because he was the company librarian for Comback Publishing Company, the publisher of Model Railroader and Trains magazine. This was his Conway branch layout that he built in his basement. This is his model of North Conway Station with two B&M passenger trains, which could well be snow trains. This was a very elaborate station built in a very Russian Orthodox style. These are part of the article in the magazine. Here's the article itself, and complete with a map of the Conway branch. And you see a photograph here of, this is Conway Scenic, the early operations that Dwight Smith ran. This is another of the B&M snow train posters. I don't know the date of this, unfortunately. This one is from 1950. By now, the B&M has gone away from paying an artist to create a graphic to simply using posed photographs, unfortunately. This is another one, 1951. So again, these were the posters. I used to own this. I stupidly sold it. Had to sell things one time, bad year. These are highly collectible, these posters. But the ones that are really valuable are the ones that are not photographs, but that are actual artists' images. The B&M published an employee magazine for their employees for decades and decades. And what's very curious is my now friend Brian Jennison's also passed away last summer, unfortunately. He had built up a collection of every single one of the employee magazines issued over the decades. And I asked him to go through them and see what he could mine in terms of information about the snow train operations. You would think, since this was a pretty significant part of the B&M's operations, you'd think there'd be a lot. There was virtually nothing. Okay, here's one cover photograph of a young woman posed as a skier. There's very little evidence in the employee magazines of the snow train operations, which I find very surprising. I would suspect they were quite popular for employees because of what I said in the 1930s about generating more work and therefore more pay in very bad years economically for an awful lot of people. This is a private snow train. So the B&M is providing a snow train service for lease, for hire, in this case for the John Hancock Life Insurance Company for their employees in Boston. This is, oh shoot. I've forgotten. I say here it's Warner, and I've forgotten whether it was Warner or Rumney, New Hampshire. Darn. That's a very ungainly looking diesel locomotive. That's one of the very few EMD BL2s that the Boston, Maine bought. They were not common at all around the country. Very few of them were built. They weren't particularly successful, but it's interesting that the B&M used them on snow trains. Again, I said I have very few photographs that are clearly diesels on snow trains. These are some tickets for snow trains on the B&M, either run by the B&M or the Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiasts. This is Mount Whittier Station on the Conway branch. Mount Whittier is not the name of a town. The railroad often would have station names that were not town names. So the explanation for that is very simple. Safety is everything on the railroad. If you have an East Ossipee and a West Ossipee, you have the potential for a head-on collision. Because if an agent is writing out train orders on a single-track railroad, giving orders to an engineer and a conductor on a passenger train, if he confuses East and West, you have the potential for a serious accident. So the railroad would often change the name of one of those stations, and maybe West Ossipee didn't like it, but it would become North something or other, to make it clear, to distinguish between these very similar sounding station names. So Mount Whittier, I believe, anyone know? It's actually Ossipee? Ossipee? Yep, okay, all right. The Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiasts, oh, sorry, no, this was the New England Division of the Railroad Enthusiasts at the time. In 1965, they ran out of North Station on the way to North Conway. Unfortunately, there was a Boston, Maine snow train operating on the branch ahead of the excursion. And the plow train derailed, and it was a serious derailment. So the snow train that day only got as far as Mount Whittier. Everybody got off and wandered around for a bit, but eventually they just went back to North Station. There was no getting to North Conway that day. This is a 1970 snow train run by railroad enthusiasts. This photograph was taken by Brian Jennison. This is Dover, New Hampshire. And this scene is completely different today. There's multi-story condominiums that are being built right now in place of what were the Boston, Maine's maintenance buildings here on the right. This was the month that the Boston, Maine Railroad declared bankruptcy. And in talking with Brian, he made it very clear it was not sure at all that this snow train was going to run, given the financial condition of the railroad. But they ran it, to their credit. Yeah, North Conway Station. This is Jack Swanberg's photograph. This is a Kodachrome transparency of another snow train at North Conway. This is what the building looked like early in the existence of the Conway Scenic Railroad. You notice the second floor windows are all boarded up. The colors are quite bright. It's very different from that first photograph that I showed you where the station was painted in very dull, what looked like gray or green colors. The station looked...
Those units are powered.
Well, they all are. These are rail diesel cars? Okay, all right. So whether all of them are operating or not, the diesels are, the prime movers are operating or not? Well, they're all coaches.
No,
but
they're RDCs, they're not coaches.
So the diesel engine doesn't,
They're all powered units.
but they don't have to run the engine. So some of them could be operating as coaches, even though they have an engine and the engine's not running. I don't know. I wasn't there. And many of these were later depowered by MBTA, correct?
Right.
Yeah, so the diesel engines were taken out and they became then literally just nothing but coaches. I have a series of these. These are 2x2 medium format ectochrome transparencies. They're absolutely gorgeous. I wish I knew who the photographer was. I think this is 1970s RRE excursion to North Conway. And it's an absolutely gorgeous day, spectacular day. I have tried enlarging the image and using a loop to try and read the number of the lead RDC, but I can't read it. So I was hoping to use that to determine which year it was. This is the same train, the same day. On the left down here, you see the turntable pit and the turntable for the North Conway roundhouse, which is directly behind the photographer. A really beautiful day. I like winter. I know some of you may be a little tired of winter right now. I don't know if you heard, but Fall River, Massachusetts got 41 inches in this latest storm. Photographed by Scott Hartley from Connecticut. He's a lawyer, retired now. This is North Conway. This is the 1971 Railroad Enthusiast train. Again, I don't know the photographer. I don't know the date, but this appears to be 1971. It's possible it's 1972, which was the last one, but I think this might be 1971. It was a good year for snow. And the February 72 train, this is why I think that last one is 71, not 72. In February 72, the railroad enthusiasts ran their last snow train to North Conway on the Conway branch. And there was a very heavy snowstorm that day, so the B&M did something very smart. They put 2 freight engines up front to haul the RDCs, even though they had prime movers, diesel engines of their own. On the left is Dover, New Hampshire. This photograph is Rochester, New Hampshire. I don't know Neil Richardson, but I wonder how he was driving in a storm like this, how he was able to get ahead between Dover and Rochester to photograph. I think the roads were not very good, but what do I know? And guess what? He got to Sanbornville. I don't know how he did that. You can't do that today on at least the old Route 16. As you can see, the storm is getting worse. B&M made a very smart move to put the 2 freight engines on the lead. Here we are now at North Conway. Bob Wilt has passed away. He lived in Pennsylvania, quite a photographer. The photograph was taken by James Harold. And here you see the train has arrived in North Conway and it's unloading at the station. This is a photograph by Dave Hutchinson. He's a B&M employee, retired now. B&M and MBTA, retired now. And this is the train master, Lester Stevenson, shoveling out the points on the turnout on the switch so that the 2 freight units can run around the passenger train for the return. Here we are, also Dave Hutchinson. Now they've moved back down onto the main line, and the North Conway station is out of sight to the left. A little bit of snow accumulation. This is a photograph by Douglas Kidd, also a B&M employee, now retired, very active in railroad writing for magazines, Historical Society magazines. Here are the 2 freight locomotives ready to go, and you notice there, you can't see the second, but there's a white flag on either side of the nose. The white flag on a railroad denotes a so-called extra, meaning not in the timetables, as a passenger train. Still snowing. This is a photograph of my own. This was the last, 2023, so 3 years ago, not 4 years ago. This was the last, that I recall, Mass Bay Railroad Enthusiast train that ran from North Conway up, got as far as the Notchland Inn. The grade continues. This is the Maine Central Mountain Division, former Maine Central Mountain Division. The grade continues out of the photograph up and over Crawford Notch to Fabian. And in this case, these are 2 Boston, Maine diesel locomotives built before I was born. And these have been completely refurbished mechanically and repainted, as you see here. A lot of volunteer work in the engine house at North Conway. And the engineer that day was a really good guy, Corey Fothergill. He and his brother are both employees of the North Coast, the New Hampshire North Coast Railroad, which runs the sand train from Ossipee, New Hampshire sand pit down to Dover, New Hampshire 4 days a week. This is Corey in the cab, and the locomotive is named for a former employee, I believe. 2023. This is just before we left Notchland Inn. And just for purposes of knowing where we are, here's Boston, North Station. Here are the remnants of what was the Eastern Route main line to Portland. This is the current New Hampshire division to Portland, and this is the former Boston, Maine Conway branch, which today runs only as far as Ossipee. From Ossipee to Conway is abandoned and out of service, but North Conway and the station in Conway Scenic are here where the red dot is. Map is 1983. And I said I would show a photograph of that poster I have. This is the B&M Snow Train poster that I own. This was the Exeter, New Hampshire presentation of this presentation, the first time I gave it in 2024. Jane Kopp took the photograph, and that's me. And you can see the presentation behind me on the screen. But that is my pride and joy in terms of my collection of railroad items. And I have a house full of railroad items. See what happens when you're not married? You get involved in things, and then they start to accumulate. And then you start to worry that you're a hoarder. Anyway, the graphics, I know who the artist is, I just am not going to recall. He's long ago passed away, but he lived in Connecticut. His son, I believe, is still alive. The graphics in this particular image, I consider this the single best of the Boston, Maine Snow Train posters. It is so Art Deco. It's just wonderful. And again, there wouldn't have been very many of these printed. This may have been printed on stone as a stone lithograph. I don't know what process was used. I have other railroad photographs from the United Kingdom and from France from the 20s on up into the 60s. And some of these things are enormous. A so-called double royal is one of the biggest sizes, and they were printed on stone. How the registration was done to get multiple colors, I cannot imagine. I've watched a woman who prints on stone at the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Massachusetts. She has a studio in Somerville, but she comes and does demonstrations at the Museum of Printing, and she prints on these small limestone blocks. And I've quizzed her about the registration for these enormous pieces of paper. It's just paper. How in the world the registration was done for multiple colors, I still can't quite comprehend. All of the stone for all stone lithography around the world comes from one small quarry in Germany. It has the finest grain limestone found in the world. A bunch of references for sources for where a lot of this material came from. A lot of contributors. A lot of these are people I know. A lot of them are, unfortunately, also burdened with being a rail fan. The Center for Railroad Photography and Art, by the way, is really in existence. It's a real organization. They just received $1 million donation from a lawyer who's passed away in Denver. He did very well in his law practice, Ron Hill. I was out with my cameras one day up on top of Tennessee Pass in Colorado. It's the highest crossing of the Continental Divide on a mainline railroad in the United States. I'm out there in the middle of nowhere by myself, and this really fast little cream-colored Audi goes flying by me on the state highway. Next thing I know, he's back. It was Ronald Hill, Ronald C. Hill. He got out of the car, came up to me, put out his hand to introduce himself because he saw me with cameras. He knew I was a rail fan. And he said, "I'm Ron Hill." I was staggered. I looked at him, I said, "Ronald C. Hill?" He's published a number of books of his railroad photography. That's how I knew of him. He then came to the CRPA's annual conference in Lake Forest College in Illinois, a couple of years before he passed away, gave a presentation. We had dinner that day. We had all day together. We did hundreds of miles up and down the Denver and Rio Grande Tennessee Pass route, which is now long out of service. One last photograph. The snow train concept developed by the B&M was wildly popular. It was the worst years of the Great Depression. It brought a great deal of enjoyment for a lot of people. Tens of thousands of people each year rode the snow trains on the B&M. And then the New Haven, the New York Central, tens of thousands more. This is the Campton, New Hampshire station. I usually start this presentation by asking, Does anyone here have a grandfather, grandmother, great-grandfather, great-grandparent who met on a B&M snow train? Uh-oh, again. Your parents? Yeah, that's exactly the point. If there weren't B&M snow trains, you wouldn't be on the planet. I marvel at the fact that someone always says yes, but usually it's grandparents or great-grandparents. Anyway, there was a small wooden station like this in so many towns around the country that had railroad service. I have a little addition I want to show. Since we're in Maine, and I don't have photographs of much in Maine in this presentation, this is last Saturday. This is the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway Museum. If you don't know about it, this is well worth a day trip. It is a blast to go and ride a 2-foot railroad, what's known as a Maine 2-footer. Normal railroad is 4 feet, 8.5 inches between the rails. 2-foot gauge is 24 inches. And you rock and roll. It's not quite so stable. And you do watch these things and you wonder, are they going to derail? But they don't. This was a plow train that left the station in Alna, Maine. The station is known as Sheepscot Station, but it's Alna, the town of Alna, just outside of Wiscasset, about 5 miles. A call went out for volunteers to help shovel because there was going to be a storm Friday night. So I went up Friday night, stayed overnight, hoofed it as fast as I could to get down here. We're supposed to be here by 7:15 to help shovel. And lo and behold, everything was already shoveled, but there was going to be a plow train run. I managed to get on board. On the left is Ed LaCoyer. He's very active with the WWNF. He's the general passenger agent. He's there every day they run, selling tickets, directing people, helping people. The fellow in the center in the background is Eric. He's going to be the fireman for the plow train. And the fellow on the right is Bryce Weeks. He works for Amtrak on the Downeaster service, but he's here as a volunteer as the engineer for the plow train today. Here's the plow train leaving. This is Sheepscot Station is the green building you see, the freight station and the passenger station. On the right is the engine house that's been built. This is Bridgeton and Saco number 8, the steam locomotive you see under snow. On the left is a small Plymouth diesel engine from the 1950s. That's going to be the power for the plow train. You see he's got a plow on the front. Well, you can't really see the plow. And a wooden caboose number 554. Everything you see here, other than the locomotives, has been built by volunteers. This was a railroad that was abandoned in 1933. Most of the trackage on the main line torn out by 1937-38. A man in the early 90s started to acquire pieces of the right-of-way and started to put them together to try and recreate enough so that he could start building the railroad again. And I have no idea how many hundred volunteers have been involved over the last 40 years putting this back together, building these structures that you see, putting down the track, doing renovation of steam locomotives. They are building a brand new narrow gauge steam locomotive in that engine house, 28 tons of steel. Incredible. They're building a brand new wooden coach. If you go inside and look at the woodworking, you would think that you were in 1880. It is gorgeous woodworking, varnished to beat the cars. Here we are riding the snow train, blasting through a crossing. This is Orrin Helbach. He's a very well-known, nationally well-known railroad photographer. He and Dennis Livesey were riding Dennis is from Manhattan. They were riding the snow train that day. They came up to photograph the WWNF. Orrin has published on the WWNF. And here he is. You can see he's up to his knees in the snow. Every time we dove off to shovel, we were up to our knees. This fellow is Dan Malkowski. He's another everybody's a volunteer, but he's religious about it. And he's the conductor for the plow train that day. Really nice guy. Loves this stuff. A family that lives in Oakfield, Maine, got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, left their house at 3:30 that morning, drove 4 hours to get to Alna so they could do the shoveling. The call for volunteers had gone out. They read it. Father Matthew here, his wife Amy, their 18-year-old daughter Shelby. their 17-year-old son, Cooper, they shoveled everything before anybody else could get any shoveling in. So I got very little exercise. But here's Matthew standing by the Plymouth locomotive. This was all last Saturday morning. So in about 3 hours, we did the whole line out and back. Had to get back in time for the first steam train. Here's the plow train blasting through one of the crossings. These are dirt crossings. And here's the purpose. This is the first steam train of the day, running out to what's called Top of Mountain, where there's a farm that brings draft horses and hay wagons, and you can ride on the hay wagon back to the farm and then get back to the next train and so on. But this is the purpose. And oh, by the way, I think Orrin is there taking a photograph of me, taking a photograph of him. He's a character. I would recommend a trip to the WWNF. Most people like it hot. This is summertime. So this is what's called head tide. There's a turntable in the far distance down there. They've turned the engine. They've run around the train on this passing siding. They've put the engine back on what was the rear of the train. Now they're about to head back to Sheepscott Station. Here are two of the volunteers. Pete Stevens on the left is the fireman. Wes Carpenter is the engineer on the right. This is WWNF number 9. Sorry, a typo there. Really nice guys. I got a cab ride with them that day. That was in August 2024. This man, who's the engineer here, is Bob Longo. He was known as Bullet Bob. Unfortunately, he passed away last July. I have donated my whole set of these frame photographs to the WWNF so they can sell them in the gift shop. And what I'm after is it'll be about $4,000 that can go into the locomotive fund for the new locomotive they're building. This is one of the stations that's been built along the line at Alma Center. They're very small stations, but nonetheless, everything you see here in the terms of the infrastructure and right-of-way has been built by volunteers. That's my presentation. Thank you. I appreciate your patience because I have no idea what time it is. Uh-oh. I'm half an hour overtime. Oh, dear. I see a question.
I remember my mother telling me, I grew up on the low line of skiers in our family in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. We drove the station wagon up to the mountains. But my mother, in the late 40s and early 50s, took the snow train from Boston up to Cannon and some other ski areas with friends when she was single. But I'm curious why they stopped in 56. Why that was the end of it.
Your mother on the snow train?
This was my mother. She met my father in Boston.
Your father?
No, they met in Boston. But
Oh, right.